Well, the siege was imposed harshly. There had been other things before, but it was the harsh siege was imposed immediately after the election of January 2006. That's actually the first real free election in the Arab world. Of course, we talk with wonderful rhetoric about our love for democracy and so on. So here was the first free election. It came out the wrong way. The United States and Israel tried to disrupt it in advance to ensure that their own candidate would win, but he lost. And both the U.S. and Israel instantly announced that they were going to punish the population severely for voting the wrong way. Instituted siege, harassment, bombardment, all sorts of activities. And it was pretty savage from the beginning. The U.S. intervened to prevent European supply of minimal materials, and things that had nothing to do with any security interest, health-related, education-related. Israel went as far as closing off the water from the Israeli water company to Gaza. And Europe went along, much to its shame. It didn't have to. So it was a U.S.-backed, European Union-backed siege implemented by Israel. It got much worse a couple of months later in June. In fact, hundreds of people were killed in bombardment. It picked up from there. There was actually a ceasefire in July of 2008. Israel maintained the siege, but nevertheless, Hamas ended all rocket attacks. The Israeli government conceded that there were no rocket attacks. In November of 2008, Israeli forces broke the limited ceasefire, entered Gaza, killed half a dozen Hamas militants. Rocketing picked up. Hamas then repeatedly offered to restore the ceasefire. The Israeli cabinet considered the offers, but rejected them, and then attacked on December 28th. The attack went through January. It was very carefully planned. In fact, they said it had been planned 6 months earlier. That means when the ceasefire began. And it continued until immediately before Obama's inauguration. That was plainly timed to make sure that Obama wouldn't have to say anything about it. He refused to say a thing about it while it was going on. It was a savage, brutal attack. Been enough description about it, so I don't want to continue. And after that, the siege continues, getting more and more harsh. Israel essentially does whatever it likes as long as there's no protest from the United States and Europe. Israel has granted just enough access to outside support to sustain life, barely, but not to reconstruct. Both the siege and the bombings have destroyed the capacity for any organized life. You can't send in children's toys, books, pencils, cement. For a while they were blocking things like pasta until that made such an international outcry that apparently they let some pasta in. There were jokes about pasta bombs and so on. But essentially they want to make sure that the population survives at the lowest possible level so they can claim we're humanitarian, we don't slaughter them all, but make sure that life collapses. And the siege is accompanied by other measures. So, for example, Israel is driving the population into Gaza. They're making the land along the border unlivable by constant firing, by incursions, and so on. And that means driving the population away from arable land. And they're doing the same on the sea. For about 9 years now, the Israeli Navy has been driving fishing boats toward the shore. Just no warnings, just come and shoot at them. And when the fishing boats are near the shore, that kills the fishing industry because you can't fish near the shore. They've destroyed the sewage plants, power plants, so it's totally polluted. And this is probably related, nobody's investigated much unfortunately, but it's probably related to a criminal activity that's going on between British Gas, meaning the British government, and Israel to try to rob the gas found by British Gas in Gazan territorial waters. Negotiations are underway. We don't know a lot about the details because it's not much reported outside the petroleum industry press. And this is real kind of outer limits of cruelty. But that's proceeding, and that keeps the population away from the shore, keeps them away from the farther and farther away from the borders, cram them in a very dense population, and they're deprived of the most elementary rights beyond mere survival. If the flotilla gets through, it will it'll have something like the symbolic character of refugee ships getting through to Palestine and after the Second World War, breaking the British blockade. It's not the same, but it's symbolically similar. It'll mean, yes, there's hope from the outside. And of course the materials themselves will be very welcome. They don't have cement for rebuilding, medical supplies and so on. But more significant, I think, is what it means to the West. If the flotilla is blocked, in the United States it probably won't be reported. Almost none of this gets reported. In Europe there's some reporting, and if it energizes and stimulates the population of the West, they can break the siege. That's the point where the siege can end. Popular pressure in the United States and Europe. It's in this respect rather like South Africa. I mean, nothing was going to stop South African apartheid until the West refused to support it and significantly opposed it, and then they had to change. And it's similar here. As long as the West, the United States and Europe, tolerate what's going on, there's no reason for Israel to stop its objectives. The same is true in the West Bank. Well, this morning's newspapers report that Hillary Clinton informed Abbas that he should stop making a fuss about settlement expansion. Well, that's another signal to Netanyahu, we're patting you on the back, you can do what you like. That's not the first. And if that's accepted in the United States and in Europe, okay, then it'll continue there too. I mean, the siege in Gaza and the attack on Gaza are particularly sadistic, but similar things are happening in the West Bank every day. And in fact, part of U.S.-Israeli strategy is to try to separate the West Bank from Gaza. That there's no legal or other basis for that, but they want to just separate them. Then Gaza can be turned into a prison where the population will barely survive, and a kind of a place for target practice. And the West Bank, Israel will gradually take over what it wants with U.S. support and with the help of European taxpayers in many ways. For example, Amnesty International just came out with a report on Israeli policies of the techniques that are used to deprive the population, this is of the West Bank, deprive them of water, destroying wells, cutting back pipelines and so on. Well, the net effect of that is that the European taxpayer pays more. The United States gives almost no aid, but Europe gives a fair amount of aid to the West Bank. And the more you have to pay to bring highly expensive water in so that people can survive, the more it costs European taxpayers, as Amnesty pointed out. Well, if Europeans want to pay the economic cost and the moral cost, which is even greater, then this will continue.